Eric Burgess here with Music Marketing TV. Today we're going to be looking at sequencing beats in FL Studio, specifically the drums, sequencing some drums, getting interesting things going on. I want to share with you just a couple of theories that shape a lot of the way I make my drums and some interesting techniques you can begin to apply in your music today. So I've got a whole bunch of just little examples that we're going to take a look at. So here's the first one. Now it starts off pretty simple with just like this melody. And this is the area we're really interested in. Give it a listen. All right, so the first thing we're going to take a look at here is you might notice that the basic drums here are very simple. And that is because drums should be proportionally complicated. So if you have complicated chords and melodies and all these sounds flying about, you should not have a crazy drum thing going on at the same time. More complex drum rhythms are going to just confuse the listener. You want to use your drums and all the elements of your song to sort of guide the listener to what you want them to listen to. In 99% of the music that I do, there is music where like non-functional harmony, where you're deliberately going to be, ambiguous and it's not really clear what's going on. And those cases are special and we're going to just sort of ignore those for now. So in this case, we have this really basic drum rhythm. And in here, so let's just really quick cover a couple sequencing tricks that you're going to see pop up more and more as we look at more examples. So the first one is, we have steps, and in here we could choose to work with steps. The problem with working with steps alone is they have a fixed amount of notes we could put in. So if we wanted to put in more notes, we could, this would be the max, as small as we can get. So if we wanted to go in and put in more, we could come in here, and in here we could add more notes, and you can hold down Alt to place them off the grid. So I really like to do this. What some people also like to do is they use what's called a quick chop. Now the quick chop, in order for it to work, it has to be over the grid line. So you might need to change your grid lines. And if you hit Control U, it'll chop it to the grid. However, I don't use that one as much. I use I use Alt U. And Alt U gives you the ability to sort of slice it up into a whole bunch of little ones. And you can have control over the various note parameters right here. I generally shape this afterwards into whatever I want. And, so on, so forth. You're going to see examples of me using this. So Alt U is you just, select the note you want to chop, and then you just hit Alt U and you can do that. Another thing that we're going to look at here is the idea of pitching drums to form, the drums almost form like their own sub-melody, but they also can have harmonic and rhythmic implications as well. When it comes to where you pitch the drum and how you pitch it. Sometimes a non-pitched element, like for example, this snare, doesn't have a clear pitch. But if we move it high enough up and down, it's going to obtain it's going to sound like it's playing notes, even though it's not entirely clear what that note is. And this is very, very good for when you have chords and stuff going on. You can really take advantage of this and make something really unique. So you're going to see various versions of these different ideas being used. So in this first one, the big idea is we're just trying to not be in the way of all the other stuff that's going on here. And then there's a bunch of accent stuff. So this is all a bunch of little Foley sounds that I had. And specifically these little hits and things. And all they're doing is they're reinforcing the meter. So everything you write, at least for all the stuff that I usually teach, is going to be heavily reliant on meter. What is meter? Meter is when you count something off, there's going to be a beat that's more important and less important, like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And so if we emphasize 2 and 4, that's going to give a different feeling. So in 4/4, the meter should be 1 is the most important, and then the other 3 beats after are less important. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. And typically what we do in 4/4 is 1 and 3, where 1 is the most important, 3 is slightly more important, and then we could do interesting things with 2 and 4. And you notice this is basically using velocity. So when people say add velocities to your drums, they're referring to using a type of meter. So here I laid out a basic drum rhythm and I spiced it up with a bunch of extra, sounds. If we were to move all these things but keep all the fancy chord stuff, some of this is melodic as well. The drums lack some of that surprise that they have because I'm deliberately going to sway away from the meter using some of these elements. If we add these in, these little extra little bits of clicks and clacks really take the drums and make them feel like they're part of what's going on, and they add that extra bit of like groove to it because these are sort of emphasizing things that are not beats 1 and 3. All right, so now let's move on to the next example. I've got here another example, and the drums enter in layers. We notice in this case we're using a loop, but it's also going to be heavily layered with a bunch of other rhythmic elements that can arguably be called part of the drums. In this particular example, I want to focus on the use of pitch drums and how developing basic drums as they layer up can, when you add in the pitched drums, it can skyrocket how musical it sounds. It's some of my favorite stuff to make. And let me just play this for you. We might not listen to the whole thing, probably up to the little piano section. All right, right here as well, I just want to demonstrate the same thing right here. Like, the way that builds is so organic and cool. And when these drums come in as their own little element, suddenly an element that generally, in most songs, when you listen to the drums, they fulfill their role. They might have a drum solo here or there or whatever, but you never expect them to come out and integrate into a song kind of like this. And it's some of my favorite stuff to do. So here on pattern 3 specifically, you can see it's the same pattern right here, and it's extremely versatile. Like you saw the same thing that was right here fit great right here. In fact, I think it sounds even better the second time. So this is pattern 3, and let's just take a look at a few of the things that are going on here. Okay, so first, let's look at the arrangement that I have here. So I have a whole bunch of hats, shakers, things that go like that. I have a few reversed elements. Like all that kind of stuff. Those sorts of rhythms are accomplished by having these little reversals. So pay attention to when this hits off, and it takes a second because it is reversed. So there's silence at the beginning. So you kind of have to fiddle with where you're going to place it, because if we play it, there's this whole silence section, and you could choose to trim this off, but you're going to find that it's a bit finicky every single time you do it. So you just got to kind of fine tune it to exactly where you want it. But once you have it, it can be wildly useful in creating these cool little like breathy kind of moments. Is how I like someone inhaling and exhaling is kind of how I visualize some of these hi-hats. Push up, bump, bump. And then you hear right there when you stop, sometimes you get a little extra. Okay, so there's that. Next, we have 2 snares. This is the first snare, or the second snare, I guess you should say. It's a standard snare. Next snare is this, like, it has this little ring at the beginning, this little pluck kind of a sound. And I immediately was like, this is going to sound dope if I move it up and down and all around. And then finally, we've got 3 kick drums. There are 3 of them, and only one of them has the job of changing pitch. The other 2 have the job of just laying down a fundamental meter, so to speak. Not fundamental meter, but it outlines the basic kick relationship with the snare. And instead of having one kick play the rhythm, I thought it would be cool to have it distributed across different kicks. So one acts as kind of an accent kick. So we have this really, really low kick, and then this like punchier, more of a up there kick. So let's take a look at the pitched elements. So these all fit together, and you can see they're large changes in generally. The snare has a bit more of a fine-tuned, when you get higher, it has more of a difference. If you go low, the range is a little bit more clear. With the kick, if you were to try and do this, the differences are there, but they're a lot more subtle. To me, I don't register this. When I'm hearing it, I'll know that one's lower than the other, but I'm not gonna like put it in a chord and like notice, oh, this sounds weird with the chord. To me, it's just going to be like, it's like a kick just hitting a different spot. And so because of this, I have these like large changes that emphasize again that you see this hits on the 2. And then these 2 accents push us back to the 3. So I'm really outlining the meter here just interesting ways. And then here I've got these little phrases that are pushing up. And this is sort of like a what do they call it? Question and answer, where the snare sort of asks a question and then the kicks sort of respond to that. And then I love little fills like this. These are embellishments. So you want to be careful where you put these. But because this is so strongly outlining, because when you write something this complex, you have to have sort of a roadmap of where stuff's going to be. And so here, you know, I've got to be careful that I don't accidentally overemphasize something, or, you know, if I give the snare such a complicated part that there was no breathing for the other elements, I would probably need to remove some things to keep it from sounding cluttered, which is something I used to really struggle with, was achieving this. And because I have these gaps, it makes it fit really well in when I add it into like a track that's already got quite a bit going on. Like, it just jams like that. So give it a try pitching your drums. And again, leave some of your drums to do, you know, traditional drum things, come up with a cool rhythm, but fiddle around with, you know, possibly leaving them alone and then introducing them as an extra bit, because they don't come in here like a drum solo. It comes in as like a response to things that have already happened in your track. And this is when this kind of stuff happens and it comes on a track that I'm listening to, it's just like, you got to crack a grin. It's just like so cool to me when stuff like this goes on. All right, next example. When sequencing drums that are in a library of some format, you will be using the off-the-grid method a lot more, in my opinion. So I have here some drums that sort of roll in and they come out and they're very cinematic. They sound like this. So there's quite a bit going on here drum-wise. I want to focus mostly on this pattern. because it loops really well and it demonstrates the use of meter and accent. So you see there are a lot of volume changes with this. And in order to get things like this, which here's an example sort of a little bit of the quick chop method here. If these were all equally loud, like if these two were much louder, it changes how it's going to sound and how it's going to push to the next phrase. And if you have something, if they're all loud all the time, you're going to, like right here, there's clearly an average. But as I move things up and down, it's because I want those beats, some of them to sound like you've almost stepped in a hole and then you've like maybe stepped onto a small hill. Like when you're going up and down, you're moving and you're grooving with what's going on here. And so again, we have, you know, the same emphasis. One obviously is a very important beat. So we have the extra big hit. We have a lead hit into a upbeat, which is also very important. This is on a weird beat right here, but we have a rhythm here. Bump, bump, bump. That kind of a thing is something also that can really work where you deliberately sort of push things off by a little bit. It creates a push and a feel, and it allows you to sort of push off beats that would otherwise sound weird if they were missing. We push into 4, and then again, we have one big strike followed into a next big strike. So this is like a push, but notice that this C is soft and this one is loud. So you get it boom, 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 and then it leads right into a roll, and things, you know, aren't quite on the grid. A lot of the times I will set these things, I'll just hold Alt and drag them around as I see fit, or I'll hold Shift Alt to clone it and put a new one down where I like it. And so creating rhythms like this, you start off with a basic rhythm, and then you sort of move forward from there. So in this case, the basic rhythm involved this. Just fundamentally when I originally wrote it, and we hit, and then here I knew I wanted to do something that sort of deviated from it, and I wrote this, and then afterwards, I don't remember this entirely, but I often will go back and add these like pushes and these embellishments and things. These are afterthoughts, not necessarily things I think up right away. And once you come up with something like this and you get all your velocity so that it all grooves just right, you can get a lot of musicality out of especially a drum kit that has so much variety in it. So that when you pair it up with, you know, your 4 to the floor kick drum, which here it sounds really weird. I believe I'm filtering this. Oh, it's the tiny kick. There you go. And then you mix it with your bass. Oh, we've got our big kick down here. There it is. And they're all kind of filtered because you want to leave room. That's another thing with when you have so many kicks and things going on. You want to leave room for like the big element. And this is what I wanted to carry the boom and the bass with it. So there's an example sort of a more orchestral look. This isn't really an orchestral track, but this is the kind of approach I take when writing extremely rhythmic stuff that's not necessarily pitched. These are pitched drums, but I'm not pitching them anywhere near what I was doing in the last example. And then finally, one more example. This one's a bit more obvious, and let's take a look at that. All right, so while this one is loading up, this is by far the most common way of getting started, and that is get to know whatever kind of music you're making. There are going to be typical drum rhythms that exist in that music, specifically a relationship between the kick and the snare. And if you can get that relationship right for the genre of music you're writing, it will sound like you've written a beat for that genre. Like the kick and the snare relationship is usually of paramount importance. So here, for example, is just a drum rhythm that you kind of expect to go with something like this. So you can hear if we were to just solo it. If I were to lose the hats, which are all just embellishment, that relationship is the core of what I have going on here. Each genre is going to have their own different core. Get familiar with it. Listen to a bunch of tracks in that style and notate a few of the more common drum rhythms that you hear in them. to get familiar with writing in that style. And this is honestly going to be a great anchor as you work with that style, if it's a drum heavy style. One other thing I want to mention here that I've already kind of mentioned, but you can hear that there's a lot more going on in the hi-hats. Again, writing with this here is okay, and you can even come in and adjust velocities and do things very quickly by clicking this button. You can mess with note releases, panning, all kinds of cool stuff. But a lot of the times this is not fine enough for me, and I'll go in and you can see there's a lot more notes here, and I'm using the velocities again, and you can clearly see different beats being emphasized over others. And this really just can make a massive, massive difference. If you play your drums in, you get this like automatically by default if you have a decent controller that can really control this. Command I really like to use with this too is Alt-X. Has the scale command. So you could scale all your velocities without necessarily losing the balance between them. So this is another popular one I like to use. But anyways, there's a couple drum tips. There's a bunch of examples. Honestly, drums can be really, really fun to write. And go ahead and try out a couple of these things in your beats. Comment down below. Let me know what you do with them. Subscribe and hit that bell icon for future videos. And have a blessed day.